Hi everyone, I'm Audrey Tung, a PhD student at the University of Victoria. I'm currently contributing to a research project about older women's experiences of homelessness and housing insecurity. Today I'll be presenting preliminary analysis from that study. I'd like to acknowledge my research team, which includes our PI Dr. Denise Cloutier, Project Coordinator Ruth Campen, Research Associates Kendall Fraser, Lexi Stewart, Taylor Hainstock, and Karen Dugella. Our team also includes 4 co-researchers with lived expertise, and we are supported by several university faculty researchers. We're partnered with the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness and the Community Social Planning Council. We're also supported by Vancouver Island Health, CIHR, and SSHRC funding. I'd like to acknowledge that we're working on the unceded territories of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. The purpose of this presentation is to highlight not only the specific challenges faced by older women who are underhoused, but also their unique capacity to respond to these vulnerabilities at personal, interpersonal, and systemic levels. First, I'll provide some background information about housing insecurity in older women. I will then contrast homelessness with a sense of home and explain the significance of caring relationships. I'll use examples from our interviews to illustrate feelings of disconnection from and connection to a sense of home. Finally, I'll close the presentation with key messages and recommendations. To provide some background information, older women represent a growing and overlooked population that is experiencing homeless and housing insecurity. In Canada, homelessness has increased 4-fold in the past 2 decades in urban centers and among older adults. In the most recent point-in-time count of homelessness in Victoria, 33% of homeless individuals were women, with 49% of this group being over the age of 50. Notably, 38% of women experienced homelessness for the first time at 50, which suggests a population that is aging into homelessness. While striking, these statistics still do not capture the magnitude of the problem because women's circumstances of housing insecurity are often hidden. For example, women's experiences of couch surfing, episodic homelessness, and living with or fleeing from intimate partner violence are seldom recognized and addressed in research in homelessness-related services. Housing policies and services tend to overlook the specific circumstances of older women, including complex physical, social, and emotional meanings attached to a sense of home. The concept of a home is more complex than is portrayed in dominant housing approaches, such as Housing First, which tend to focus on the material needs of social groups that are most visible, such as middle-aged men. That said, the housing sector has been struggling to meet the material needs of dominant social groups, let alone those of people who are hidden from society, let alone their conceptualizations of a home. To be homeless, in our view, is to be uprooted not only from physical space, but also from the social world. Women are often excluded from the labor and housing market, social policies, housing-related services and supports, public life, neighborhoods, and communities, as well as the private sanctuary of a home. So the cruelty of housing insecurity for women is that they are excluded from the public realm with no private sanctuary to retreat to. The lifelong accumulation of these gender-based disadvantages leads to housing insecurity in old age, a time when women are especially vulnerable to its consequences. Housing insecurity is particularly disruptive to older individuals, whose identities are tied to place and the sense of belonging they derive from it, hence the widely acknowledged need for older individuals to age in place. What is less recognized, however, is that the experience of being underhoused is especially dissonant for older women, who carry the ingrained social identity of a homemaker. The perceived failure to meet that social role is a source of shame and stigma that older women often internalize. These feelings are exacerbated by dominant stereotypes about homelessness, which either hide older women's distinct experiences of housing insecurity or ascribe these experiences to moral shortcomings. Public narratives about homelessness typically blame individuals for deficient circumstances produced by intersecting structures of patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, ageism, and other systems of oppression. By contrast, a sense of home encompasses physical, social, and emotional connections that ground individuals within their home environments. It is rooted in a sense of self, belonging, community, and place. For older adults especially, a home represents an expression of individual and social identity, of belonging in a community. For many women, the home space is a source of agency in the private sphere. By constructing a sense of self, place, and belonging, people may resist the identity of homelessness, which can linger long after obtaining physical housing. In the absence of adequate or suitable institutional supports, women often rely on relational networks to survive housing insecurity, which renders their circumstances invisible in mainstream spaces, services, and policies responding to homelessness. Relational networks can be a double-edged sword for women. On one hand, they leave women vulnerable to gender-based violence and exploitation. On the other hand, relational networks facilitate access to life-sustaining care that is often enacted by other women. Either way, many of these experiences equip women with unique capabilities, including resilience, reciprocity, and empathy. Using these qualities, we suggest that older women may empower one another to build a sense of belonging in a community and ultimately in a home. Although care is often framed as a downstream response to housing and health conditions, it is crucial for countering structural discrimination that also pervades policy-making processes. Caring relationships can also facilitate social inclusion in housing environments and systems. For this to occur, policies and services should recognize and support both informal and formal care work, such as wraparound services, peer supports, and child rearing responsibilities. Care is life-sustaining yet undervalued in society, much like the women who often undertake this work. This model is taken from an article by Victoria Burns, who builds upon the idea of aging in place. Oftentimes, older adults who are underhoused do not feel entirely in or out of place, but rather oscillate between the two while housed or during homelessness. A sense of place is associated with feelings of control, comfort, privacy, and security, which are influenced by both housing conditions and interpersonal relations. In other words, social connectedness and positive relationships can help to create a sense of place even in the absence of suitable physical housing. On the other hand, social alienation and negative relationships contribute to feelings of uprootedness, even while physically housed. In our study, we are gathering stories of women age 50 plus who have experienced homelessness and housing insecurity. On this slide, I demonstrate how experiences of social alienation and harm have uprooted older women from home environments. These experiences include cyclical abuse due to intimate partner violence or intergenerational trauma, estrangement from friends, family, and partners, exclusion or discrimination in labor and housing markets, unsuitable housing environments where older women face exploitation, harassment, and violence from other residents, unequal power relationships with staff members in shelters or supportive housing, as well as restrictive and disciplinary rules within these spaces, and a lack of wheelchair accessibility. Now I will show how caring relationships can facilitate a sense of place and of home, even in the absence of suitable physical housing. Many of our participants spoke about personal advocates who precipitated a turning point in their housing circumstances. We heard about support workers who empowered participants to heal from trauma, rebuild a sense of self-worth, and seek assistance from housing and health services. We also heard about the significance of community, such as a culturally appropriate Indigenous support group, a street family that offered solidarity and protection from violence, and an online group for a building where one participant was able to find assistance with moving. For several of our participants, it was very important for them to give back to the community once their circumstances were more stabilized. 4 of our participants serve as co-researchers on the study, and 3 of these members have also undertaken peer support work for housing nonprofits. They derive a sense of purpose from peer support work, which helps to overcome feelings of shame and stigma for themselves and their peers. This perhaps also helps to restore their identity as a care provider, even as they continue to receive care from others. So far, I've demonstrated that caring relationships can redress the alienating experience of homelessness and housing insecurity. That is not to understate the cyclical and structural nature of housing precarity, which yet persists in the presence of care. But beyond simply mitigating the symptoms of housing precarity, care represents a negotiation for social inclusion in home environments, communities, social services, and even upstream policies. Here are several interview quotes that illustrate the importance of positive social connections in housing-related services. For example, one woman living in temporary housing remarked that the essence of being home is belonging somewhere, which is something she felt that she lacked. One participant was able to seek help with substance use, healthcare, and housing services once she found social acceptance from a housing support worker. For her and many others, social and internalized stigma was a major barrier to accessing support. She later served as a peer worker, which also facilitated her recovery from the trauma of homelessness. Another participant who both received and provided housing support similarly spoke about the camaraderie and connection among peers and service users. This work also provides her with feelings of accomplishment that help her move forward in life. A main takeaway is that physical housing alone is insufficient to end homelessness. A sense of home extends far beyond physical housing, especially for older women with complex and overlooked needs. That's why it's critical to include their perspectives and experiences in housing policies and practices. It's important to note that older women are disproportionately vulnerable to housing insecurity because they're often excluded from the workforce, the housing market, housing supports, and social policies. So social inclusion is also critical because even after becoming physically housed, people need to reconnect with the social world in order to heal from the alienating and stigmatizing identity of homelessness. Older women can be housed in unsuitable environments that do not provide a sense of home. Conversely, they may proxy the experience of a familial home, even on the streets, by forging a sense of belonging within a community. In that sense, community acts as a buffer against structural disadvantage and marginalization. That is why caring relationships are crucial for older women who are experienced in both providing and receiving care. In that sense, older women are uniquely positioned to facilitate social inclusion through relational networks they have often navigated to support themselves or their households. In our study, we like to use the analogy of Jenga. On one hand, gender-based vulnerabilities can stack with age until a point of rupture, such as a loss of housing. On the other hand, older women have built unique relational capabilities that can support caring housing environments. In other words, they hold a lifetime's worth of strength. Interventions that contribute to a sense of home for older women span individual, interpersonal, and institutional levels. Firstly, we recommend co-housing models that are inclusive to women with different needs. These needs include private living spaces with communal areas, mobility features, and opportunities to reconnect with children and grandchildren. On these premises, we also recommend giving women a choice between independent living or supportive housing with wraparound supports including healthcare, long-term care, counseling, substance use services, and assistance with daily activities. This is to recognize that some women may prefer autonomy, while others require higher levels of support that should be available but not imposed upon them. Housing-related services should follow a person-centered approach that is tailored to the needs, wishes, and aspirations of service users. This framework also builds upon the strengths of individuals, which include older women's capacity to mediate caring relationships. This strength equips older women for peer support work, which should be scaled up in housing services. At the systems level, we recommend integrating fragmented services while ensuring that they adapt to the circumstances of the individual. Given the dehumanizing effect of shuffling people around and requiring them to complete onerous paperwork, we recommend reducing bureaucracy requirements and implementing systems navigators who follow clients across different agencies and services. There also needs to be greater cooperation and less competition among service agencies. Now, for service providers to succeed, they require adequate and flexible government funding streams and policies that recognize the needs of older women. To truly achieve equitable housing outcomes for diverse older women, policies and services should respond to the ways in which intersecting identities shape housing circumstances, needs, and preferences as defined by people with lived expertise. For instance, culturally appropriate supports led by Indigenous women can help to redress a legacy of colonial dispossession and violence. Government policies should also strengthen institutional support for formal and informal caregiving work, such as peer work, caregiving professions, and responsibilities for child rearing or parental care. Care is often undervalued and unrecognized in society, as with the women who have provided it over the course of their lives. They ought to be cared for in home environments and society at large.